and people who might be listening will know this to be true, is I basically ask people to come prepared to talk about something that they've worked on, something ideally non-trivial, but it doesn't matter. Something that they know very well because they were principally tasked with building it or came up with the idea on their own if it was a side project, whatever it is, that they know really well. And it's best if people come ready to talk about the thing that puts a smile on their face, because generally speaking, when you're talking developer to developer, and I am a developer, you can generally cover a lot of ground, and you don't have to worry about, like, you can assume a base level of understanding about the technical concepts involved. And so in that respect, it's a lot easier for a candidate to relax because it is kind of a stressful sort of environment. And then when people are more relaxed, they generally give out better information, more information, and so you can use that to either confirm a feeling you get about the candidate that they should maybe progress, or maybe that they should. And so I use this kind of hybrid style interview process as a general filter. And what I'm trying to get out of it is basically, and I can get into this in a little bit more detail, but I look for character traits in people first off. But we start by talking about their project. And as we go through the project, I'll highlight on something that they've said and engage them in that way. But yeah, I guess I'll just leave it there and see where you want to take it from there.
Yeah, so you use this technical project as a gate to this character, and well, can you name maybe these character traits that you're looking for, a specific one?
Oh yeah, like, so there's a bunch, and they're just things that you can commonly see in people who've reached success in at some point in their lives, like. And so some of the things I'm looking for are things like drive, right? And so that's like, it's the best way to describe that. It's like they have this need to achieve things, right? That just can't be.
They have
faked.
energy. They have energy.
That's part of it, but it's not just energy. It's like you can be enthusiastic about something, but then not do anything about it. That's not what I'm talking about. It's like you get a sense for how somebody drives the conversation as to how much it means to them, like in what they do. So like in the case of a software engineer, it's like how much do they enjoy their work, right? By how and how do they view their work, I guess, and how they drive forward in the pursuit of whatever it is they're looking for in their work, right? And so for some people, it's just a paycheck. Some people, it's like a craft, right? And they want to be at the top of their game in that craft. And so they, it manifests in a bunch of different ways. But like some of the other ones are just things like humility. It's like, are you confident in your excuse me, in your abilities, but understand that your perspective isn't the only one that matters, right? And so and then there's things like resiliency and adaptability and effective intelligence and some of these other traits. But there's like 9 of them I use, and I don't ask like open-ended questions with respect to trying to assess these things, like you might be familiar with in traditional kind of behavioral interviews. The reason I use a project as the basis for the conversation, it's like, in truth, the project doesn't really matter to me much, which is why I don't put any restrictions on what people can and can't talk about. Like it doesn't have to be something absolutely non-trivial that got 1 million users in the first week of launching, right? Like it doesn't have to be that thing, right? It'd be cool to talk about, but it doesn't have to be that thing. And so from my vantage point, that project is just the centerpiece around which we can talk and we can find out information about each other. So it's a vehicle rather than something that I'm going to use in the hiring mechanism. It's just a way to get you to talk. Because in my experience, creative people love to
Mhm.
talk about their work.
Exactly. This is what I because you mentioned two things like that I wanted to note. You mentioned
Hmm.
humility, and conversation. I think this is like the goal is not to get answers, but to see how the conversation goes, right?
Yep.
And yes, and I feel it's really hard to determine exactly those skills because, for example, we have a word called mature that
Hmm.
pretty similar maybe to what are you talking about, but again, this is not about technical things. This is about how you lead the conversation, how you
Sure. Hmm.
actually, well, how you listen, how you how mature. Yeah, this word actually have some of this traits character.
Yeah, like obviously the way I go about things is, or maybe not so obviously, but the way I'm using these as like data points, right? Because some are more important than others. Like integrity, as an example,
Hmm.
can be can be closer to the top of the list if my project involves like, you know, I'm going to use ridiculous examples, but like if I'm building something that has like national security concerns, right, or military applications, right, like that's integrity is probably pretty good there. You know, you want to do what not only what is legal, but also what is right. You know, and it's like a balance, right? And
Hmm.
somebody who's high on integrity might do well in this kind of interview if they can demonstrate that, if the role demands it, right? But if you're a junior software engineer working on non-safety critical systems, right, like you're building a SaaS app of some kind, right, like, or a mobile app or something, and there's no greater societal impact to it, it's like integrity probably ranks pretty low. Like you want to do what your users are going to use, right? What the company can sell towards whatever the company does, right? And so other character traits might be a little bit more important, like humility in that case, right?
Hmm.
And so part of my process is when I am hiring for a new position, I go through and I rank order these concrete, or these, I guess, sort of subjective trait metrics that I use, and I rank order them in a list, and I take the top four, and those are the ones that I focus on. Now, it doesn't mean I won't touch on the other ones, but it's like for this role, I need these things, right? And so, for instance, if my team is lacking in attention to detail on, say, documentation or something, right? Like that's going to be something that I focus on. It's like I want to understand how clear your communication is, right? So maybe your ability to communicate is a little bit higher on that list than it normally otherwise would be, right? Because this isn't so much a rigid set of rules as it more is a framework that I use
Hmm.
when I'm interviewing candidates.
Okay, so can we say that that your feeling, like when you talk to the candidate, you feel good or not good? Is this is something that is reason
Oh,
you hire or not?
Uh, so yeah, there can be, I guess, to use a descriptive phrase, there can be like an ick somebody gives you, right? Like they're just off-putting in some way. They maybe wouldn't mesh well with the people who construct your team right now, like the people on
Hmm.
your team, and so they may be a disruptor in that sense, and that might not be what you're looking for, right? And so for those reasons, you might disqualify a candidate that otherwise has the skills uh, and might be good in that position in some other team, right? Um, but the main thing is I'm not looking for a feeling good. I'm looking for data points, and so like I'm making notes when I
Hmm.
interview people. I'm jotting down things they say, maybe topics I want to come back to, and I've got this little checklist of things when I get this feeling that they've met kind of that it's not like a strict line that I have that only successful candidates get above that line. Like it's not, it's more like a range, right? And so like, are they in that range of they can still do things on my team for my company and grow their career, right? Doing the things that they were likely to be successful at. It's like, are they in that range? And if the answer is yes, then they progress past, right? And if they're clearly farther ahead in their career, and I don't think that there's anything that we will do that can help them progress in their life, like with their career goals, like that puts them, they may be the perfect candidate otherwise, but they're not at a place in their career where it makes sense for them to take on a certain role, right? It's like, that's unfortunate, but that does happen sometimes. And so regardless of what the reasons are, it's like there will only be a small amount of people who do fit within that range, right?
When you interview people to hire, what are, especially remote, what are the red flags that you have?
Oh, yeah. Biggest one is just an inability to self-regulate, right?
How
That
it
is,
is, how this is expressed, how you can.
yeah. So self-regulation is one thing that people who have bad experiences working remote, like from the employer's side anyway, um, they tend to have issues with people working remote who don't have good self-regulated capabilities, within their frame. And so that tends to give the employer one particular view of remote work. But from the side of expectations on a candidate, it's like, I need you to be able to self-regulate your emotions, right? So if you're the kind of person who's politically inclined, right, it's like, understand this is a place of business, right?
Right.
It's like we make a thing that does a thing for a particular group of people. Those are the people who pay us money for the thing that we build for them, right? So our first responsibility is to make sure we're doing the right thing for them, right? It's not about this random issue that you may have in society, right? And how that manifests itself in the team. Like we can certainly talk about those, but that is not the primary thing that we do. So it should not be a major thing on the team, right? And then, sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
So the red flags about like
Oh yeah,
self-regulation.
yeah. So like as an example, anybody who's spent a significant amount of time working on a team has had disagreements with their team members, right?
Yes, yes.
It's like, how do they react when that happens, right? So like the way I typically approach this with software engineers is I just ask them about some part of the system that was maybe contentious or that had a bigger discussion than maybe overall needed, and how it was, what the context was around it, how the discussion went, and what the resolution was, and how did it apply to the thing that they were building, right? It's like all of those data points when taken together, you can start to get a sense as to how they might self-regulate, right? And like their understanding of just human psychology, right? Like for creative people especially, going outside into green areas has been shown in different studies to actually give you a more focused attention on the things that are important that you need to work on, right? And so like, do they have an understanding of things that work for them in that sort of similar vein, right? And all of these things add a little bit of information that you can use when determining or making because ultimately you're guessing, right? It's like
Yes.
making a I'm going to say making a determination, although you are just guessing as to whether or not this person could be successful working remote. Because ultimately, when you're hiring somebody, you're making a bet, right? That person is going to be successful in that role for the reasons that you have, for filling that role. And so it's incumbent on employers to be intentful. Like they've got to know what they need on their team, and they've got to look for those things. But also, it's like going back to the self-regulation, it's like you gotta know that you need to look for this if you're going to hire people to work remote. You need to know how to screen for this, because in my experience, and I've been working remote for 15 years,
Hmm.
it's like the single biggest factor, assuming everything else is equal, it is like the thing that makes or breaks somebody being successful working remote.
I think this is a the good point, maybe to stop and discuss this further, because I think I can add that
Sure.
this is from my side. I have some experience consulting developers in this conflict situation, and I think this is about respect. How the person respect others in the team, how especially management of the team, because
Mhm.
typically developers don't like management, like they hate them, like they don't like, and this is in many cases typical thing. Well, it happens, let's say this way, and it's probably very self-explaining how a candidate share this conflict experience, how candidate can actually, as you mentioned, how the conflict was resolved, what the outcome, what he or she did. So this is interesting. And when you like expand, or when you go deeper, so I think you'll go deeper during this interview, you find maybe some conflicts and try to understand what happened. So what is like how you do what you want to understand from the conflict? What person, like what right to do in the conflict, and maybe what not right.
Sorry, what are you
I
saying?
mean,
Like in the right?
when you explore the conflict situation from the
Mhm.
candidate side, how you how you decode it, how you try to understand this.
Oh yeah. It's just what steps went into it, how did they
Mhm,
view them? Because like what the truth is doesn't matter
mhm,
exactly in this context, because it's more like their view of what happened, right? And
mhm,
so I don't even care if it's the truth. I don't want them to lie to me, obviously, but I understand that when somebody is reiterating a series of events, it's always colored with their perspective, right? So what the actual truth might be slightly different. But what's important is just how they viewed it. Did they see it as a conflict? And if it was it like a me versus you kind of thing, or was there like I don't know, was it more collaborative? It's like, okay, well, you know, speaking in terms of like software, it's like, well, maybe we could take this approach, but no, you want to go this approach. It's like, okay, well, can we talk about them, right? In any level, and how those conversations go. And generally speaking, I want to like, I'll ask things like, what was their view of the person after it was resolved? Like, how did they view them? Was it positively, or did they feel like they were pushed into doing a particular solution, right? Like against their will almost, you know? And it's important to understand how those kinds of things play out. And so that's why I just ask them uh, to describe those things, and then we'll go from there. But there's no like series of questions that I asked. It's all very free flowing with just this framework in mind.
mhm. Are you specifically looking for such situation during the interview, or you just take them if they appear?
It's something I'll get to at some point, because like when you're developing software, there's invariably friction points, and those could be like in the planning stages with a product manager. They could
Mhm,
be in an execution stage with your engineering manager. They could be with other people on your team, right, over approaches or code reviews or things of this nature, right? Like whatever they happen to be is almost immaterial. It's like conflict is going to arise at some point, and I want to understand one of those instances. It's very rare that I'll ask about another instance, but like um, one instance and kind of how they handled it. And one of the important things in the way that I screen candidates is I use the information they give me. So if they're very short with their answers and they only answer exactly what I asked, and they don't tend to add additional details that may be small, but they help carry a conversation along, right? It's like that may give me kind of the signal that this person maybe was around these decisions, but maybe wasn't principally charged with them. They may have had some involvement, but it wasn't like principal involvement, right? And so that all contributes, right? And I make no bones about it. Like, we're just having a conversation dev to dev, but I've got a set of things in mind I'm looking for. I don't know exactly what it looks like. I can't paint it in a picture, right? But I could describe it in a fat marker sketch kind of thing, right? Like, so it's just using the information you've got available to you to make a decision.
I see.
And so long as you're acting with intent and you know kind of the approach that you're going to take and what you're looking for because you've spent the time to do it and you've practiced this a lot, it's like you should not have any problems. But there is no getting around it. You need to put in the work. You need to figure out how to do it that works for you. And like, my system works for me, at least for now. But it didn't always look like this. It was a progression of things over time that I learned. And the reason why I take this approach, among others, is because I generally only have like 30 to 45 minutes with people, sometimes an hour, depending on what the position is. And so in that time frame, it's like, I don't want to spend 15 minutes, getting them comfortable. I would like to keep that number as small as possible. And so this is kind of why I structure the way I do it the way I do, because it's designed to be you a software engineer talking to another software engineer who you can assume a base level of understanding of the art of software development and related topics, and set the expectations at the outset. So like, if you are granted permission to ramble explicitly, it's like you're more likely to not self-filter, right? Some people will still self-filter on the things that they say, trying to say them in a way that appeals to the hiring manager, right? Like,
exactly.
You're not getting around that. But if you can set the expectation out of the gate that it doesn't penalize them in any way, it's not going to help them in any way. Because realistically, it's what they say that helps or hurts. But you can do that, and it's been my experience that puts candidates specifically, in a more relaxed state, where they only really have the jitters for a few minutes after that. And so it's more time that we can chat. Like, I'm going to learn how you'll talk to the team, right? If you're relaxed and you're thinking about your work, it's like, these are the similar sorts of ways you'll interact on the team, right? So I get a good sense of that. And it literally does not penalize you if you go off on a tangent. I will just interrupt you, and I'm not trying to be rude. And I tell people this. It's like, if I interrupt you, it's because you've said something that I want to focus on. I'm not trying to be rude. And if they interrupt me, I'll take it the same way, right? And so the best conversation I had in this style was a couple of years ago. I was hiring for a lead engineer for a friend's company. I was helping him out doing a screen. And we got 45 minutes into the call, and he interrupted me, and he said, "Hey, listen, this has been a great chat, but when is the interview going to start?" So he had a hard stop. By that time, I already knew what my answer was going to be, because like, we had a conversation. We covered a lot of ground, right, in a natural kind of fluid variety. So I just smiled and told him the interview's been going on this whole time. And yeah, I've had a few occasions that has been the case. And it's like, sometimes it's a very clear no, but sometimes it's like, yeah, hire this guy before he starts talking to other companies. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. This is like, I read this in Zappos, about the Zappos, when they start interview from the plane, when the person meet the candidate near the plane. And this is the actual start of the interview. And you don't know this. But this is how you interact. This is how you This is how the conversation goes with the
Well,
person that is not actually the company.
yeah. And like, I'm not involved at all points in the hiring process. You shouldn't have one person who is solely responsible
Hmm.
for it. But when you talk to the first person at the company, you're talking to a recruiter, right? The
Hmm.
recruiter is going to have some base level understanding, but they're not going to be able to answer your technical questions, right?
Hmm.
At least insofar beyond the stack and the kind of thing that we build, right? Um, and so the real issue is all of those notes that the recruiter collects, I read them, right? And I already have a base level understanding of things like your communication ability, like do you speak good English, right? Because
Hmm.
sometimes that's important, right? Um, the kinds of things you've worked on in the past, they also collect that information, right? It's like not necessarily specific projects, but like the kinds of things you like doing, right?
Hmm.
And that's all going to give me useful information that I can use if you do get uh, promoted to talk to me by the recruiter, right? Because they're only going to promote the people that pass their screen, right?
Right.
And so,
Right.
yeah, it's a labor intensive process, and you've got to be fully committed to it when you have an opening. And so, you just need to do the things that work for you and test things that you're not sure if they could be part of a future solution. Like if you're not approaching things in a way where you can learn new things, it's like you're probably doing it wrong.
Okay. And um, if we want to summarize a little bit the skills that, let's say, we as an employer are looking for in the remote candidates, well, can we do this? Maybe. Well, it's definitely depend on the role,
Yes.
but we have something I think in common that it's accountability. Uh, this is um, I noted like this is respect in the team, like
Hmm.
how you deal the conflict. Um, what can you add? Like just a very short.
Yeah, from the employer's side of things,
Yes,
I use the phraseology "be intentful with purpose."
intentful,
Um, yeah, and
like
what it means to be
intention. So
intentful,
it should be
it,
right intent.
it should be you are doing things with intent. You're not just going into a
Okay.
conversation to see how it goes. You're like you have a thing in mind that you're
Hmm.
looking for, um, but you're also not set necessarily on the direction you take to get there. You just hope to
Right.
steer the conversation to that end while gathering information along the way, right? It's like you're picking berries on the side of a path as you go from one place to another, right?
Hmm.
You're going from that one place to another. The route you take may not be as important, right?
Intent. This is a great thing to mention in the recruiting process because in my experience, I work with my team, and sometimes recruiters ask me, should I write this to our customer, or should I remind, or should I follow up? I always say, well, if your intent is good, you want to help and save customers time, you can do whatever you want. Like
Yeah,
literally,
so long as
you
it's to that end, right? Like it's
yes,
like
yes.
do what you think is right. That's
If you keep
integrity.
exactly, if you keep this intent in your mind, you can do whatever you want. You can't break things if you don't like specifically want to.
Yeah.
So understanding well, so this is I think great thing because in this identifying and maybe aligning intent from the candidate to your specific need in the position, I think this is the right thing. Well, in the combination with other things like with trust, with accountability, intention. So, for example, if you need someone to test software, you have to find candidate with intent to have a perfect code.
Well, not
Like,
just that. If you're hiring somebody whose principal role will be testing software, like you want them to understand human psychology to some
hmm
extent, anyway.
hmm
Like That's an
Yes.
important key thing in their role, right? It's not just about can they produce good code, right?
Hmm.
It's like you got to understand what you're actually hiring for, because one of the things that I've learned in software is a lot of hiring managers, directors of engineering, etc., don't do this very well. They they maybe know a set of responsibilities that they are missing on the team because they're like undercapitalized or whatever, right? Like they need more resources to do a job, right?
Hmm.
And so it's more of the same that you're looking for, right? In that case, like if that's your mindset because it's all you've ever done is just add capacity, it's like you don't typically go into these conversations knowing exactly what you're looking for. You've got a template in mind of boxes people need to check, but like you're not necessarily taking as big of a look at what your current team does where it's deficient, even if it's not deficient for because that's a pretty strong word, but like where it's maybe lacking in some respect where it could be better, right? So like maybe focus on that as like something that underlines kind of what um, you're looking for. And so I would just say it's as important for a candidate to be prepared for an interview as it is for the company interviewing for like to find a candidate to fill a role. It's like you need to have all your I's dotted and your T's crossed and know exactly what you're looking for and why it's important that they have these things. And if you can't clearly articulate that to, say, a recruiter, the recruiter's not going to help you. Like
Hmm.
they'll try to, but they're not going to get you the kind of candidate that you really need, you know. And so your hiring process will be more expensive as a result.
Hmm. So when you so this is important. So we are slowly moving to the employer side, um,
Yeah.
and to understand and to find exact intent from the candidate, you have to know um, which function you want to cover with this intent. Because as I mentioned, testing software, and then you're saying it's not always actually good code, because um,
No.
this is the end user.
Well,
This is like the goal is to have end user who is happy, who
let's
have. Hmm?
let's go on that idea just for a little bit longer. Let's just mention one more thing about that. It's like if you're like, let's just say this is a QA role of some
Hmm.
kind, right, with some software involved as well, but mainly around writing tests and things like that, right?
Hmm.
So say you have that role available and you need to add to the team for that reason, right? If your team is letting a lot of defects escape, and I don't mean a lot being, some astronomical number, although it could just be more than you feel comfortable with, right? It's like, well, maybe that should be your focus. It's like, how do you bring in somebody who can help move the team, and they don't have to be a leadership role. It's like, can they just be abrasive enough that it starts a conversation within the team to this end to to improve the situation here, right? Because that does a couple of things. Number one, it fixes a problem potentially, right?
Hmm.
It's not without risk, obviously, because you might be creating some disharmony within the team. Um, but so long as it's carried out well, because you've screened the candidate for like communication and team ability and all these other things, right? That are important for working with others. Humility being a good one here. Um, you can probably avoid the negative impacts of that kind of discussion. So like so long as you're also covering that base, right? Which is why this isn't just these three things are what I'm looking for. It's like there's a lot of support stuff that happens around those three things. You've got to include that in the conversation. But in that sense, for that QA role, it's like your goal may be to reduce the amount of defects that get past them, right? Because your software engineers are going to produce defects. And so if you
Hmm.
have a separate team to kind of act as a check on their testing ability and whatnot, um, you want them to capture any of the defects that escape the engineering team to be caught by the QA team and sent back, right? And so you just have to know what you're trying to achieve when you hire. And it's almost never just, I need more capacity. Because just adding capacity because you need capacity can create other problems.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to know a lot more information. And if you do this at the same time you're collecting information about whether they would fit that kind of template that you've got, you can ask them questions that are more on the behavioral side and start to get a sense as to how they would work. And if you ask enough of them, you can paint a picture, although you're using crayons, right? You won't truly know until they're on the team, right? But you can get a little bit more confidence in your assessment the more you act with intent when you're hiring.
Mm-hmm. I think that what we described is applied actually not to remote only. I think in remote, when you hire remotely, is just those character traits. They have to be a little bit higher level.
Yeah.
Some of them, right? So I think
Yep.
this can be applied just to any role that you have on site or remote. It doesn't matter. Well, so we have a little bit time maybe to discuss from the employer side
Mm-hmm.
how employer should what kind of skills employer. I think we are talking about engineering manager, team lead.
Yeah. Engineering manager, team lead, that kind of side.
Yes.
Definitely needs to learn some of these skills.
Yes. So what they should learn, a little bit more to manage to work with remote developers, and
Sure.
actually starting from the interview phase. We are talking about
Okay.
starting from the interview.
Yeah. So I strongly believe that you need practice. You need to go in.
Hmm.
So if I've got 3 meetings today and I'm meeting candidates to fill one role I have, it's like, okay, not everybody, like, you have to understand that not everybody's going to communicate the same way. So you can't approach them the same way, right? You have to quickly assess how to carry out the rest of your conversation. And you've got to practice these voices, is what I call them. You speak in different voices because some people might be more reserved. And so they might be more inclined to sit and listen to you.
Hmm.
Because there's basically 3 types of people in the world. There's analytical people, for whom like silence is required for thinking, right? There's assertive people whose silence is uncomfortable because they feel like they're not being listened to or aren't, they're not contributing to the conversation in a meaningful way. And then you've got agreeable people who generally see silence as an opportunity to say something,
Hmm.
right? And these are generalizations; they don't apply perfectly to everybody, but in general, those are the 3 types of people you'll meet. And so need to know how to talk to each one of them, like just at a base level. And so, like, for engineering managers specifically, it's like there's a lesson I had to learn, and it's like half of your time is spent managing your boss, right? Quarter of your time is spent managing yourself, and the other quarter of your time is um, you know you're not managing your team so much as you're there to support them, right? And all of
Yes.
your time is like spent at your level or above, right? Because that's how you're most effective at your position, in my experience anyway. And like, I've been in this kind of role for closing on 10 years. And so excuse me, it's just you need a higher level of communication than you're probably screening for, meaning you have to have more of those skills than the person you're interviewing for, because there's a bunch of things that go into it. Just good public speaking in general, which I could use some more practice on. But but avoid filler words. Like I've said a lot in here, and I'm aware of that. It's like something I want to cut back on. And one way is I can do that is by talking slower. And like a lot of people could benefit from talking slower. But yeah, there's also this inherent thing, at least that exists in my brain and many other people's, is like when there's silence, you want to fill it with something. And you have to resist that urge sometimes, especially when you're talking to certain types of people.
So yes, this is the communication. This is something important. But what about also about the expectations? Like, for example, let's say if you didn't work before with remote part of the team and you actually starting doing this, so what would be about the expectations? What this engineering manager shouldn't expect or
so
can
specifically
expect?
specifically within the remote context, it's like there's three things I've loosely learned. And during the start of the pandemic, like I was giving this advice out multiple times a day because people knew in my network, people knew that I'd been working remote for years before then. And so I'd learned some lessons the hard way. It's like, have a space you can dedicate just for work. Now I understand not everybody can do that, but we'll get to that in a second. But for a lot of people, they may have a spare bedroom or at least, some area of their home that they can dedicate just for that purpose. It's like they don't go into that space unless they're doing one of two things. They're cleaning it up, because don't work in a disgusting environment. Throw your trash in the trash, as an example. And secondly, unless they intend to work, right? So if you're not intending to work, don't go into that space for any reason at all, right? Only go into that space if you're intending to work. Now, a corollary to that is when you do go into that space, dress like you're going to an office. I know you can work in your pajamas, especially if you don't have a meeting that day. Don't do that. These are all psychological things, right? Dress like you're going to be presenting an idea all day, right? With only like 2 5-minute breaks, right? Dress like you're going to be seen by everybody all of the time. And this is important because it's a frame of mind thing. If you get too comfortable in the same sorts of clothes you do other things in, the same sorts of activities around your house that you do other things, like this is where distraction creeps in, right? And this probably hits a good number of people. We're talking double digits of people, right? And then the final thing is just don't bring anything into that space that you wouldn't bring into, if you worked in an open air office cubicle kind of environment, right? So like pictures of your family, your pets, whatever, okay, probably fine, right? But you're not bringing other things into it, right? Or at least you shouldn't. And if you can, so like when you're talking to candidates, you want to touch on what their work environment looks like, right? If they've run into issues that they've had to make changes working remote in the past, good number of people by now have experience working remote. And so you want to learn about their past experiences working remote. What worked, what didn't. Maybe if they had periods where they weren't as productive as they wanted to be, like what were some of the reasons why? It's just like, if you can answer that question, like you know it to be true for at least some point of your work life, it's like, you know it to be true. Do you know why? It's like just knowing why ticks a few things in that you might, like a few things on your list you probably have, right? Or at least are related to them in some way, right? And so those are the things that I think employers need to get better at.
I think this is a great question for the interview, like to talk a little bit about your workplace, how you build it, because this will tell, this will tell a lot. This will tell a lot about the candidate.
Like, I'll give you an example. I have a space. I'm in it right now. I only come in here when I intend to work, but I don't just work on one thing. And so I sit for one type of work. I stand for another type of work. It's a different mode. right? And so like you can use this same thing if you have to work at your kitchen table, right? It's like maybe get a little laptop stand or something and stand at the kitchen table when you're going to work, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like just find another way to use that space differently, that you will only use that space that way when you intend to work, right? The simplest way to do this is just dedicate another room or a closet or something for work.
Okay. What about the communication? For example, remote assumes that
Yep.
it's
Everything is
about
async.
async. Yes, exactly. So this
Yep.
is something that every engineering manager should learn. Uh, well, if he didn't yet.
Well, yeah,
uh,
like a fundamental thing for engineering managers is understand that the nature of your job is different than that of a software engineer, right? Software engineer's job is highly dependent on focus time on their particular problem, right?
mhm,
It's not to say engineering managers can't benefit from focus time. Yes, they absolutely can. Just the amount of it available to them is a lot less than they think, especially for emerging engineering managers. And that's why a lot of software engineers who go into the management side end up burning out and going back to software engineering. Is for exactly those reasons. And so it takes a particular kind of person to fill these roles successfully. And one thing they all understand is that the nature of your work is chaotic, right? People will come to you at all sorts of times, especially if you're a globally distributed system. Like I've got team members in the Philippines, right? It's like 14 hours ahead of me,
It's
right?
opposite side, right?
Opposite side of the world. And so it is challenging in its own unique way, right? But that's not to say if all your team is in the same sorts of time zones as you, like plus or minus 2 or 3 hours, right? Like you'll still have these periods. And so it's really tempting, especially on a globally distributed team, to be available 100% of the time. It's like I will always answer questions as an engineering manager that any of my team has, you know. And while I have some people in, say, Atlantic Canada and some people in the Philippines, right? Like they're 12 hours apart, right? And so I'm 2 hours behind Atlantic. And so like it can be tricky to not want to log on at 11 o'clock at night and answer a question. But you have to understand how you work and what you need in how you work. And this is why I mentioned before, like 25% of your time should be focused on managing yourself, right? And this falls into that category. And so you just want to make sure that and this goes back to being intentful. It's like you have the information you need to decide how to do things. And this is no different than, practicing your interview style, the framework you use to interview candidates. It's like figure out how you're going to deal with that case where it's like they're stuck on an issue 12 hours ahead of you, 14 hours ahead of you, right? And so when they get the issue, it's like 11, 12 o'clock at night your time. Like, what are you going to do? And so you want to have an ability for you to help your team on block, but you also need to recognize that you can't do that all the time. And so one thing I've noticed is just document your processes. There's a lot of things engineers do that is just like in their head. They know it because their team does these things all the time. It's like write them down, right? Because when people forget little details all the time. And so having a knowledge base that they can access this kind of information in whenever they need it. It's like make sure it's of good quality and it's up to date and all these things. And these are all part of what an engineering manager needs to do. They need to make sure these things are clear to their team. They need to have systems in place because your fundamental job is to help your team. Full stop. You act as interference for them sometimes. You act as a senior who's been there, done that before, right? And you also have like an understanding of the business and the user that you serve, right? Or the users that you serve, in a way that maybe an engineer doesn't pay a lot of attention to. And so you direct a lot of things, right? But you may set you may pull items off of the roadmap and decide how they get built, right? But fundamentally, you need to understand what your role is, because you need your team to have ownership over the things that they build, and that means they need to direct the implementation strategy. And you may know that there's a better way of building things, and you can certainly offer that as feedback. But you also have to understand that for a lot of team members, especially on the more junior side, the things that you say implementation strategy wise can often seem like dictates. It's like, do it this way.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, and they'll adapt their mental reality to fit your kind of off the cuff comment, right? And so you need to, I can't say enough about expectation setting. Everybody on your team should know how to work with you, how you work, and you should know how to work with them, because you're there to serve them and the business, right? Because and this is just me personally, I don't worry about senior engineers moving on to other companies for either better opportunities or more in line with what they want to do, or maybe they're just burning out, like whatever it is. I don't worry about losing those people, because I do know that I can create more. And so the way I go about doing things works for the types of organizations I've worked for. I don't know that it's generally applicable to the wide swath of software teams, but I think there's more value in the way I approach things that other teams can build on, and incorporate certain ways of being intentful into their process. And so I just want, from the employer side of things, it should be a red flag for candidates if an employer isn't intentful with what they do, that they don't have a compelling vision of how things could go for you, right?
Mm-hmm. I think
And I know I'm a
important.
little all over the place, but this is the key thing. It's like, from a candidate's point of view, the employer's got to be intentful with what they do. They've got to
Intentful.
make your life easier. So they should have all the information. They should be able to answer all of your questions.
Mm-hmm.
There should never be a case where they can't answer a question, right? And
And
so they
because
need
of
to
this,
prepare.
sorry, and because of this time difference, the remote employees, they should definitely feel the trust from the engineering manager.
Yeah, like if you can't trust your engineering manager, they're not effective.
Right.
I'm just going to say it, like, they're not effective. And so they're deficient in some manner. And it's incumbent on them to receive that feedback, number one, right? But also it's incumbent on, and so like that should be incorporated into your review process. As an example, any performance reviews should go two ways, right? It's like, how well am I serving you? How well are you serving the company and the team, right? So yeah, I guess that's where I'll end it.
Okay. Okay. To summarize this, like very shortly, it's about intent from the employee side. This is about
From the employer side,
yes.
and
I think this is
ability to
both.
self-regulate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but principally on each, like, yeah, everybody should do only the things they intend to do.
Mm-hmm.
Full stop. But like, an employer has a bigger burden of stuff that they need to understand fully and incorporate in their decision-making process. And if they can't do that, they're not going to get the kind of people they need.
And
But then from the candidate side, like, the ability to self-regulate is key on remote teams. If you don't have it, you need to develop those skills.
Okay, great. Because I think the biggest reason is that in the remote world, you can't actually control these employees like in the office, for example. You still can't control fully, but in remote, there is absolutely not possible. So this
This is why
connection.
it's important for employers to screen for self-regulation of candidates, because
Yes, exactly.
candidates who can self-regulate will behave in the way that you expect them to.
Yes, self-regulate, have the intent that you are looking for, and you share your intent, like you share what you're going to do. Like this is should be coherent intentions.
Yep.
Well, yeah, and this kind of sounds pretty clear by default, but if it is not, because
Well, that's the thing. It's a framework. It's not a set of steps. It's not an algorithm you can follow. It's a
exactly,
framework for thinking about how you need to hire to fill a role on your team. Like it is,
yes, this
and,
is, we
and
can.
more generally, it's like how you work with others,
Mhm.
I suppose, in some sense.
Okay, so
So
okay,
it's not a
great.
prescription. It's
It's
a
just a
way of doing
direction,
things.
way of
It's
doing. Yes,
yeah. It's if you think of it as in terms of strategy, it's like getting A to B, right? And then from B to C. You're not trying to get from A to Z,
Mhm.
right? So
Okay, Jeremy. The time is over. I think it was a good conversation. Hopefully, with some insights that we can share. Thank you for joining this call. Thank you for sharing your experience. Um,
yeah,
and
thanks for having me.
yes, sure, sure. Okay, thanks everyone for watching. Please have some comments if you have what to say. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.